two amazing guests. We have the word pair keywords as cosmos and art. And now, Wendy and Ralph, I'm giving word and time and space for you to discuss what could be this in-between relation between these two topics.
Mm.
Who wants to start?
Well, just to divulge to the audience, we already had just a little bit of a chat before, and so we already were starting to get things rolling. And I think in response to some of the things that you were talking about this difference between how the scientists and the mathematicians think in looking at the cosmos, and then when it is interpreted or explained to the rest of the audience using words rather than using formulas. I think one of the things that's always astounded me is in listening to scientists and mathematics when they talk about the beauty of mathematics, and very often you these ideas about cosmology, not about how the universe is put together, sometimes is in the form of mathematics and in the form of formula. That people who can understand that language, they find an aesthetic in it that we might not necessarily be able to see. And then it has to be interpreted into something that then us laymen are able to appreciate.
Well, it's a very particular kind of aesthetic. Somebody called it, I don't remember the name, ionic enchantment. It's basically the way mathematics shows us how the world coincides with itself. In other words, how it makes sense. And when you, even for the most basic demonstrations, geometric demonstration about something like the Pythagoras demonstration, when you understand it, you have a feeling that can only be described as a kind of rapture. It is a feeling of beauty. In that sense, yes, mathematics does give us a feeling of extraordinary beauty, but there is another form of beauty that art also contains. I mean, yes, art contains this element of self-coincidence, or elements of the world making sense. But there's another element that art contains that mathematics does not seem to be, and that is the fact that the world sometimes appears to be not coinciding with itself, appears to be chaotic. So that whereas mathematics is about cosmos, art is about cosmos and chaos. Art is about showing both, about, in effect, if we're going to be like Nietzschean, about representing the chaotic in an organized manner, the great tension of attempting to represent the chaotic in an organized manner. And the relationship between art and science has always been very strong. It has come under attack very frequently with the Romantics, for instance, with postmodernism. But if you look at the Renaissance, for instance, somebody like Leon Battista Alberti, when he says that describes something, a painting is a window open onto the world. Now, what he is describing the painting is as an activity whose one of its main functions is understanding the world, an attempt to understand what is reality. And in that sense, some I've read very recently placed the beginning of the scientific revolution and the artistic activity of somebody like Filippo Brunelleschi, with the invention of the perspective between 1413 and 1420. The date is not very well defined. So when that perspective was discovered, what was discovered was the basic way in which the world coincides with itself, in which the world makes sense, in that different points of view of the same phenomena, which apparently produce different objects, can be unified using a single geometrical process. This is the mathematization of the world. Once
and
that
at the same time, because
yes.
of the invention of microscopes and telescopes, we were also beginning to as well understand our place in the universe. That cosmos began to take on another element, that sort of the perspective of where we were, but both from the perspective of looking out from Earth, but then we were able to also turn it around and then begin to understand ourselves in a larger picture as well.
Yeah, and this is why this idea, this separation, wholly artificial, between arts and the cosmology, I think is a grave error. Some would say, okay, artists use, and which I do as an artist, I use my intuition in order to create paintings.
I have one more, like, sorry, Ralph, for interrupting, but I think maybe it could be a good point to continue then, because when you're speaking about that cosmos and art, like in cosmology and art, like highly divided in between, but maybe then by like pointing what is the, like, why is the idea for like dividing them? Maybe that could lead to the question, what is like really things that like connecting them? Because from my perspective, I don't think that in my understanding, cosmos and cosmology are too far from the art. But maybe this like pointing out what could be this idea to divide them could be also a good point to start where they like really close to each other.
I fully agree with you, Masha, that they are in fact, when you're using your intuition, usually you use your intuition, you continuously, when you're working on a painting, you continuously refining it until you reach something that you might describe as a form of order. And in that sense, it's intuitive mathematics. And you can even, this is a good description of music, for instance, as being a form of intuitive mathematics. Artists, when they are working, they are in fact using some kind of, and that's a hypothesis, they are in fact using some kind of intuitive mathematics. So that if we consider that mathematics is the language of the world, art and science are converging up onto the same thing, which is in effect what we might describe as a cosmos, in its opposite, of course, chaos, in its opposition to chaos. So yes, the separation between the two, which probably started with the Romantics and their reaction against, sometimes justified, sometimes not, reactions against the Enlightenment, could in effect be, we should start to view it as something that needs to be addressed. I don't know if we might call it an error. It's produced such beautiful objects, but something that needs to be examined, re-examined.
I'm thinking as well about the same ideas, and one of the things that always strikes me in conversations about cosmology, whether it is with art or not. I mean, I think that art is basically just an experimentation with different kinds of media and different kinds of ideas, and that pretty much everyone in the world is going to have some kind of relationship with cosmology, whether they're astronomers or whether they're, everybody. But one of the things that I think is actually quite different is in looking at cosmology, if you're looking at it as an atheist, or as somebody who is looking for a larger pattern, or somebody who is looking for a higher being or something like that. And I think that this is something that comes up again and again in art. Sometimes it's not able to be spoken very loudly because of when it's being made, and it might have to just be hinted at in looking at the pictures, or something like this. Nowadays, it's able to be talked about a little bit more openly. But one of the things, this, Ralph, what you were talking about, this feeling of rapture, of looking at mathematics, looking at science, looking at these cosmological kind of phenomena, and having this rapture or this aesthetic feeling, in knowing where you are in the universe, being the wonder and the contentment that can come from realizing that you're a small part, or that you might be able to be a large part, and things like this. And then very often that this is tied in with what, for lack of a better word, is very often interpreted as religion, or as some kind of a spiritual sense, or something like this. And so I think that this is also where it starts to get a little bit dangerous, and also sometimes a little bit strange, is when you have people who are very creative on one side and asking questions about cosmology without necessarily having a very good understanding of the science.
True. And the tendency for it to produce narratives that can be described as pre-modern, or I don't know. Well, which leads us to this question of spirituality. What do we mean by spirituality? In Buddhism and in Hinduism, there are forms of atheistic spirituality. So spirituality is not necessarily only the domain of the religious, although there are, of course, spirituality, great spirituality in religion. So the association between religion and spirituality as being some kind of monopoly, that's problematic. Which leads us to the next question. Is it possible to reach or to discuss the cosmos? And by the cosmos, we mean the order of the universe, not necessarily the universe as something ordered, the universe as something intelligible.
Yeah, which also has this chaotic element in it.
Which has
always.
a chaotic
So
element in it.
that,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Chaotic element in it. In fact, some in things we're not sure are reducible to science.
Yeah.
Things such as, turbulence, there seems to be, I'm not sure, I've read this, like a book on it like 5 years ago. It might have changed, and the book itself was a bit old. Things such as turbulence, there seems to be no way to be able to predict how a turbulent current is going to behave. But there are other problems such as, for instance, what's called the hard problems of consciousness. What is consciousness? And these seem to escape until now. And we don't want to fall into the God of the gaps. But these seem to escape forms of rational descriptions. Regarding the question of consciousness, it escapes rational description because every rational act presupposes it. You can't explain something that you already presuppose. You can't rationally explain consciousness if your rationality already presupposes its existence. It's explaining something with what you are attempting to explain. It's a circular issue. Does this justify the so-called woo-woo sciences? These flights of fancy? Of course not. These speculations about consciousness, about things which until now science has been unable to explain, should one avoid the notion of the God of the gaps, and second, they should also avoid the language that can be made to explain anything, meaning that it can be made to say anything and its opposite about anything and its opposite.
And I think that this is also where you begin to get people who are working on these, intersections or cusps between arts and science, is that they're finding that there's one that doesn't ask or answer the questions that they are really wanting to get at. And so they're having to go back and forth between those two different spaces, because they're not able to pose a question in science, but they are able to pose a question in art, and vice versa. Sometimes I wonder, it seems like the pursuit of making art is very much a search for consciousness, a search for a cosmological search for being able to look at where that chaos and order is crossing one another, to sort of the stupid but yet really profound question of why are we here, what are we doing here, why am I here, kinds of things that then are come up again and again and again and get answered differently again and again and again.
We have, to be honest, in connection to your discussion now, a few very nice comments from Twitch. So I will read one of them and one question that can lead our discussion further. So first comment, it's going back to this discussion about scientists and the creativity in science. So the comment is, scientists and mathematicians are as creative as artists. Scientific ideas are the product of creativity. The methods are not. Like paintings are art, but the brush technique is just a technique. So I think it could be very nice adding to this previous discussion about aesthetics, arts, creativity, and mathematician as a different rational thought. And also we have a question going back to this microcosmos and macrocosmos. Considering the microcosmos and considering the microcosmos and the microcosmos witnessed through microscopes and telescopes, how small and how large can art be?
Factually, I think there was artworks or animations made on an atomic scale once. I saw that. How large can it be? Can be spiral jetty, for instance, something that's a mile long, or these great crystal projects, which I don't like very much, but anyway, these square kilometers of art. So factually, yeah, it can be as small as atomic and or molecular, and as large as several square kilometers. That's factually. Another way of looking at it is that if you view images of the microscopic and you view images of the macroscopic, both are the occasion for great beauty. Even the deadliest viruses, if you look at them, they are, at least visually, very, very beautiful.
I wonder how it is that we as humans are predisposed to finding aesthetic value in the microscopic or the macroscopic, which is something that obviously has only been very recent that we've been able to even perceive. And this idea of this order that that you find again and again the same kinds of patterns when you scale up and when you scale down, and these are the patterns that we have evolved to love and adore over the centuries, that you find them again and again. And so I think that working with macroscopic and working with microscopic as well, the ability for the arts to be that large or that small. I mean, if you take conceptual art, that basically art is, as well as sometimes but not always, a actual object or a physical manifestation that exists in the world somewhere. But what's to say that you wouldn't be able to go infinitely minuscule or infinitely large with conceptual art, or with something that is, working purely with an idea? And I think that this is also getting back a little bit to how scientists are able to think like artists, is because of this fact that they can, within an idea, zoom in and zoom out and say, okay, and also extrapolate and take an idea and put it into something else as well. This whole genre now that's coming up of space art, they're doing some really, really interesting stuff with that. That's getting easier to find interesting examples, as well as when they're getting access to things like artist in residency programs at CERN and being able to do zero-G experimentations. And so there's some interesting examples out there with people doing this stuff called space art that's worth looking at.
Definitely. And this is like really big way to explore more. And for now, we're already speaking 21 minutes. So we're a bit ahead of our time. And if you want to say something to like sum up, to maybe, or you have still some ideas that need to be pronounced, just please do it. We are not cruel people, okay. Giving people some voice.
Wendy?
One of the things that, because of this, you were saying a little bit before the actual conversation started, and I wanted to come back to this, that some of these, that you're a little bit alarmed right now with some of these conspiracy theories and these other things right now, where we are right now in May of 2020, in the middle of this bizarre pandemic, that people are looking for patterns and looking for things that are this pre-modern, idea that defies logic and also defies science in some ways. And so one of the things that I think would be worth it to wrap this up is that there is something between these words of cosmos and art. If you expand the word art to be talking about critical thinking towards this chaotic side of the cosmos, and that cosmos being the word that is about our understanding of where we are, that this can be sometimes so misinterpreted and so manipulated that it turns into the ability for people to be believing in very, very bizarre conspiracy theories that endanger not, I wouldn't say humanity, but that really it's hard to back out of that. It's hard to get a society to step away from this precipice of this very where science and art has gone wrong.
And it is, in fact, it's I think one of the function. Well, it's part of the responsibility, like we said before, of the scientists to conceptually explain things that are not necessarily available mathematically for the usual, for people who's no advanced mathematics. But also this notion, there is, I think we see the appearance of this notion of art as a world-building activity. And you see that very frequently in games that are in fact use artificial intelligence in order to create universes. Games in which in fact you can travel infinitely. This is actually quite extraordinary. It's the attempt, it's very close to Leon Battista Alberti's attempt of reproducing the cosmos within a limited spatio-temporal frame, but it uses the advanced mathematics that humanity has reached in the last 500 years, including artificial intelligence. So there is, in effect, this explosion where humanity, through art, is attempting to represent the cosmos using the foundational mathematics that produce the cosmos, but using it on a representational level. It's, in fact, mathematics attempting to equal the universe. And, I hope it works.
Just to finish our discussion, I would like to ask one more question from Twitch that I propose you to answer very, very briefly, with a short answer. So, Wendy, you're talking about this misunderstanding of scientific information. And now we have a question. We are seeing in this world the growing rejection of science and cosmology among them. For example, flat earthers seem to believe in the dome as a universe contradicts their belief. What do you think? Will there be a similar rejection of art?
I think that my experience with most of the people who are flat earthers, they've already rejected art a long time ago, or their idea of what art is something that might not necessarily be the same as the majority of people that we are around or who are watching right now. But then the question is, where did they get their rapture? Where do they get their aesthetic experiences from? And this might be something that is worth looking at a little bit more of, is because that is a bizarre form of critical thinking, to criticize science and just disregard it. And so being able to embrace critical thinking of the way that we usually come across it in art, or critical thinking that is anti-science, where that might be able, in this very strange jetty of swirling things, be able to come back and find itself circling one another again. I mean, it might, I'm not really sure where this kind of stuff is coming from. It is very alarming, and it's based on, obviously, a misunderstanding of what the science is.
So, Ralph, what do you think? Is there any misunderstanding about what art is?
I think it's not gonna be a rejection of art. It's gonna be a simplification of art, a vulgarization of art. And you see them produce videos with music, with with what might be described as very, very primitive, vulgar forms of art. So the rejection of science will not lead to this disappearance of art. It will lead to a simplification of art, as happens when a society collapses. When a society collapses, what you see is a simplification of its tool-making abilities, of its culture, of its cities, shrinking. When a mental structure collapses, what you see is a simplification of its different manifestations, including, among different manifestations, the production of art. So they will continue to produce arts, not just like the Mycenaean society, when it collapsed, continued to produce pottery, but it will be of much lower quality.
Thanks a lot. I think this is a very good conclusion for this brainstorm session that really shows up that this format of 15 minutes discussion really could lead us anywhere. And this discussion really could really have a very, very long time to spend. So thanks a lot for your time. That was a bit more that we discussed before. And thanks a lot for all our audience that attend, for all that interest and questions. And just important thing that the next discussion will start in 30 minutes directly at 3 Central European time. And we are looking forward to see you there too. Thanks a lot, Wendy and Ralph.
Yes, thank you for the moderation, and thank you for the opportunity for this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Masha.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.